It's Triple Crown season. A Kentucky Derby champion has been crowned. We move on to the second leg of the Preakness Stakes. There's no Derby winner, but we're still here to talk about it. I'm Nick Roush. He's Peter Thomas. I'm used to just PTF. Peter Thomas Fornatel from In the Money Media. PTF has joined us. He helped us break down the Derby. Now we're here to talk about the Preakness. How are we doing today, sir?
Oh, we're doing well, man. It's exciting. It's an unusual Preakness. Not having the top two from the Derby back isn't my favorite, but at the same time, we've got a deep and competitive field. We've got 2 great days of racing, some very special wagering opportunities, covering it all over the place at inthemoneypodcast.com, and very happy to be covering it here with you.
Now I got taken to the cleaners on Derby Day. You know, we had some winners on Oaks, we had some winners on third. The Derby was rough. How did your Derby go, and how surprised were you that Golden Tempo didn't just get up, but got all the way up and was able to win the roses?
It's one of those things we talked about them all week as the live long shot to run in underneath. And then you get to a point where you're like, well, why did I try to split that hair? And, as I go back and think about it, it's always so easy after the race, right? But heading into the race on paper, you had 3 horses that were supposed to be closing better than he was. And he just happened to get the better trip / find a little bit more late on. It's also possible that some of those horses that we were so keyed up about heading into the Derby weren't maybe quite as good as we thought. This was not a fast Kentucky Derby. A 95 buyer speed figure is not. I mean, it's slow. Not only is it not fast, it's slow. And it's possible the group wasn't that great. He got the best trip. He got the job done. Tell you what, though, from a content creator's point of view, what a wonderful story, right? Cherie DeVoe becoming the first female trainer to win, the brothers running 1-2. There was a lot from a fan point of view to take out of this year's Derby. But from a gambling point of view, I'll tell you what I took out of it. Bupkis.
Hey, you know what? You win some, you lose some, but it's all about getting up off the mat. One of the guys that was hanging out with me at Oaks just was taken to the cleaners. But you know what? He emptied the clip on Always a Runner, and he got it all back and then a little bit more. So it's all about getting up off the mat. We're going to get off the mat and preview this Preakness Stakes race where I don't think it is a surprise that Golden Tempo passed on this race because of not just the short turnaround, but also, I think the added distance helps Golden Tempo. Clearly, if the Derby was a mile and 3/16, Golden Tempo would not be the Kentucky Derby winner. Instead, they're going to hold off for the Belmont. This is the second year in a row that's happened where the Derby winners bypass, and I believe we've only had one or two. Sans journalism, obviously, but this is becoming more of the norm. And many people speculate, especially since Churchill Downs took over the Preakness Stakes IP, that change is afoot. What do you make of all the changes there at Laurel Park this year? There's uncertainty about what's going to happen with Pimlico. Do you think that the Preakness as we knew it is going to change in the very near future?
I would assume yes. And the Pimlico, they're under renovation. They should be back, unless I'm missing some part of the story. They will be back in action there come next year. But as far as the spacing goes, I think it's time. If you look historically, the question you have to ask yourself is, what is the point of the Triple Crown? If the point of the Triple Crown is to have one horse going for the Triple Crown, maybe you could make some minor tweaks and accomplish that. But if the point of the Triple Crown, and tipping my hand here, I believe the point of the Triple Crown is to have the best 3-year-olds running against each other throughout these 3 historic races, because I think that's what really generates fan, media, gambling interest, more so than anything inherent about the 5 weeks, 3 races in 5 weeks spacing. If you want to do that, you probably got to put 4 weeks in between these races. Happens to not line up too badly on the calendar from a fan point of view, certainly, with a first Saturday in May, June, and July type of a deal. There are political reasons why it's difficult for it to happen, but if God came down from heaven and was charged with reinventing horse racing and doing what was optimal for everyone involved in the big picture, That's the way they do. That's something
Yeah.
like that is a lot closer than the 3 races in 5 weeks. Look, other people feel differently, and I'm not going to say they're wrong. I'm not going to hand wring too much about it, but I do think there's an emotional attachment to this 3 races in 5 weeks. And one other argument I just need to dispel, even though you didn't ask the question, but so much when I say this, I get this knee jerk reaction from people. It's supposed to be hard, is what they say. It would be harder the way that I'm laying it out if you have the
Yeah.
best horses facing you twice instead of just once. So I don't buy that argument. I do get some really smart people. I talked to Graham Motion. I talked to Michael McCarthy, trainers who put horses through all 3 legs, who came out arguably stronger on the other side in Animal Kingdom. And then, of course, journalism, who you mentioned last year. And they have this thing like there's a romance to the idea of how cool is it for a horse to do this 3 times in 5 weeks. But, whatever you gain from that, you're losing in terms of the larger narrative storytelling. I think change is afoot, and I welcome it.
Well, and if you do the first Saturday of each month, it makes it a clear calendar where you know that, okay, even if I'm a casual, that first Saturday of the month, starting in the spring, going into summer, I know I've got a Triple Crown race on. And then furthermore, it really would space out nicely if you wanted to do a layover to almost make it like a quadruple crown with the Travers. I know that's a little bit later on, but you give them a little bit of a longer layoff, because I'm with you. Like having the best compete against each other. That's why I'm fired up for the Stephen Foster coming up at Churchill Downs. I mean, they're bringing Baeza, Skippy Longstocking to face Sovereignty. That's going to be an awesome race. And like the thought last year at the Breeders' Cup before Sovereignty scratched of having those horses race again, that's exciting. The other part too, Pete, 4th of July, great American holiday. But you know what? The sports kind of stink. We watch people just shove hot dogs down their throats, right? Like that is what
Surely
people.
we're more interesting than that.
Exactly. So you know what? Let's delay it to Belmont Park. I would be all for it. Hopefully they can make it happen in the future. But in the meantime, we do have an interesting Preakness field. It doesn't really look like a grade 1 on paper, I'll admit, but it is from a gambling perspective when you look at what these horses have been through, sort of how this thing plays out. Like I wouldn't be surprised if a handful of them made it. I want to start with the horse that I liked as a long shot in the Derby that wasn't going to run, but I think their connections looked at the field and said, "Hey, we might be able to win this thing." Incredibolt ran a big race at the Virginia Derby, had a long layoff, and then I thought was in pretty good position to make a late run. But Oselli actually kind of bumped further due into Incredible, ended up finishing 6th. What did you make of the late decision to set by the connection to say, you know what, let's send Incredible to Maryland. Let's give it a go.
My first thought was to be amused, because this was the guy whose dad had said, nobody talks about the Preakness in that infamously in that conference call a few weeks ago. Well, in this case, apparently the apple falls far from the tree, because Riley Mott seems excited to get Incredible to Baltimore. And he's an interesting story. I mean, you made a point about the trouble. I thought he hadn't. My read was to be a little more skeptical that he had a pretty good trip up to that point and wasn't able to find what he needed at that point to stay out of the trouble. Now, that's what's great about trip handicapping, is 2 people can watch the same race and see it different ways. But look, he's a talented horse. He's been on our radar. He was high up on our In the Money Media, inthemoneypodcast.com top 10 list from very early on. Eric DeCoster, who creates that list for us, was very bullish on it, and I think he's got the talent to run in the frame here, to run in the top 3 or 4. But my thought was he's coming out of the Derby, so he's going to attract wagering attention. 5-1 he is there on the morning line. I think that's a good educated guess, and at that price, I think others appeal a little bit more for those top 2 slots. So I'm going to keep him in the mix underneath, but he's not where I ended up landing in the spot.
The other, I mentioned Oselli off the top, and it feels like the 5th straight year that I haven't even thought of an also eligible, and then it ends up hitting the board. Is this a case where Oselli just ran Oselli's best race, Or is this horse trending in the right direction ahead of the Preakness?
My read was, as I mentioned, I wasn't overly impressed with the form of the Derby. So if you're not impressed with the form of the Derby, even though the 2-week turnaround, as much as some trainers don't want to deal with it, historically these Derby horses run back pretty well in the Preakness. Having said that, when it's a slow Derby and you've got this sort of now famous name, sort of a public horse in O'Selley, actually running in the money in the Derby, these horses are not really ones that I'm super interested in. He had a great setup and a pretty clean run in the Derby. He might get a good setup again here, but this is another one where I think you're supposed to be against him from a betting point of view. And defensively, maybe you leave him in for third and fourth once again, because he has shown the ability to finish his races. At least I certainly respect him, but he's not appealing to me.
Well, I saw I'm not one. I know you will take a closer look at some of the time form pace figures where there are only a couple closers and there are a lot of sort of early speed horses in this race. One of which is the local choice, who looks great on paper with Taj Mahal, undefeated in 3 starts at Laurel Park. Every race gets faster and they keep stretching them out further. When you look at those, what do you make of those time form pace figures and who could be emerging at the top of the pack when they start to make that turn from home?
I do think that there's the potential for a scrum for the lead in here. The 2 horses I think make the most sense to try to put on the lead. Taj Mahal from that inside draw. They certainly, to me, have no choice but to go. I think he'll be out there. The other horse I think they're going to use his speed and be aggressive with, and also being from an outside post, they almost have to. Paco Lopez, also an aggressive jockey. Napoleon Solo, I think, has the potential to be out there winging and might take a take no prisoners approach. And then it'll be up to Sheldon Russell aboard Taj Mahal. Do they hook him? Do they really turn it into a war up front? I think it's probably going to be one of those 2 who goes. But the horse that I think is going to end up potentially in the perfect position, and we've seen him stalk and pounce to victory before, is Iron Honor. Because looking at his time form pace figures, he's got the speed to be up in the vanguard. He doesn't need the lead. I could see him letting Napoleon Solo clear ahead of him and then just sort of naturally ending up in that garden spot and hopefully cruise around there, attack on the turn, and go on with it. Because that's the horse that I'm the most interested in, is Iron Honor, even if he does end up being the favorite. I think he'll be a bettable favorite. And this is a horse who, right after that Gotham run, I was thinking, well, this is a horse, reminds me so much of the other 2 recent Chad Brown winners of this race, Cloud Computing and Early Voting. And he's so shrewd. I think he knew, maybe not the first, and certainly after the Wood, he knew, maybe not for the first Saturday in May against all the best of his generation, but maybe the 3rd Saturday in May against a deep and competitive, but inferior to the Kentucky Derby field. Maybe this horse can shine. We've seen this movie before. And for me, when I pick out something like that months in advance, I've learned over time, first thought, best thought in this game. No paralysis by overanalysis for me. I'm sticking with my guns. Iron Honor is the top pick. There's other interesting horses to talk about, but he's the one I'm putting right on top in all my analysis.
Well, and I feel like that I kind of group him in a little bit with Chip Honcho, where these are horses that showed some promise early, but in their last Derby prep didn't perform well, and their connection said, "Okay, we're not going to be game for the Derby, but the Preakness might be our best shot." Chip Honcho came in second in the Risen Star, second to Paladin, who I think was a lot of people's Derby favorite until he got taken off the trail, beat Golden Tempo in that race. You obviously, you're all about Iron Honor. Do we think Chip Honcho has a chance to come back strong and perform well in the Preakness?
He's got a big chance. I mean, and he had an excuse. And the problem with him is like the race situation. You talked about the time form figures and how this is going to play out. So I think part of the reason why the last race went so wrong is they tried to raid him and he resented it. So that's sort of the good news and the bad news. The good news of that is, he's way better than that. And he's shown that in his training too, since lots of positive reports in the morning. But the problem is if he's going to have to be rated with those other speeds in here. So
Yeah.
has he learned enough to rate kindly? If so, big contender. If he guns and ends up being the third horse, the meat and the sandwich between the likes of Oselli and Napoleon Solo, I just think that's going to be an almost impossible trip for him to manage. I have him in the mix for sure, and there's a lot of positives in this direction, but I just see Iron Honor getting a better trip than him. I have fewer questions about his ability to pull the trip he's going to need to get the job done in this year's Preakness.
The Preakness Stakes, it's Saturday, 6:50 post time on NBC. You can catch a lot of Pete's coverage at In the Money Media on YouTube. It's outstanding handicapping from all angles, including the undercard. If you want to wager on the race, might we suggest our friends at First Bet? If you download that First Bet horse racing app and use that promo code KSR250, you're going to get a $250 sign up bonus. So for every $100 you wager, up to $1,000, you're going to get 25. So, $100 a day at the Preakness, get an extra $25 bet, maybe to put on Iron Honor. That sounds like a great wagering decision to me. So download that First Bet app, deposit bet today. They just redesigned it, made it much more user friendly. You can play all of the races with First Bet. Just use that promo code KSR250 for your sign up bonus on the third Saturday of May here at the Preakness Stakes. And I got to say, before we got on, I took a look at the undercard, and it's different for the Derby, whereas like Derby Saturday or the Oaks Friday, a lot of horses will kind of plan. It'll be their first start, right? Like there's a lot of people who point towards that. It's just an interesting mix. Some of these horses might have gotten a tryout at Keeneland, or you have some of the homegrown favorites at Laurel Park, or even some horses that ran at Churchill Downs the week prior to the Derby. I'm fascinated, Pete, that the late pick 5, 4 turf races leading into it. I've never seen anything like that.
Yeah, it is unusual. It is unusual to run 4 in a row like that. This wagering menu is terrific. You could find it over there at the First Bet site. I'm actually going to do a special post too over at inthemoneypodcast.com. But there's some interesting horses. If you got another minute, I'll throw out a couple interesting ones.
Okay. I will give you the one in the race before the Preakness, the Jim McKay. Graham Motion has in the one hole run Curtis run, or excuse me, not Graham Motion, Mike Maker. Sorry, Mike.
I love that horse too.
Mike Maker on the turf, like okay, say less. But also in his first start of the year, ran second at Churchill Downs opening day. I think he's going to be in a great spot, and it's a turf sprint where he doesn't have to be in front. Like I feel like in any of these turf races, it's just a stampede coming down the stretch to get there. So I like that run Curtis run in the Jim McKay, the race before the Preakness Stakes.
I'm with you. I'll go back to race number 9 for an angle I was doing some digging on. I thought one of those days, that day of the Transylvania at Keeneland, there was a little bit of moisture in the track. I didn't think the rail was good on the turf, which is something you see from time to time at Keeneland. One horse that didn't really run very well on that, but now I'm interested to see under different circumstances, the 4-runner Atfield. This horse showed so much talent at 2. I think he's got excuses for the last couple. And then I was going to mess around with him along with Proton, the 5, who also spent some time on that, what might not have been a great rail, and the 6 Turf Star, both for Graham Motion. 4, 5, 6 for me in the 9th race on Preakness Day. And then one just long shot I wanted to mention for your exotics, or maybe a penny on top in the Preakness. I think Talkin, the 5-runner, is interesting. There was a real buzz around this horse as a 2-year-old, won the maiden up at Saratoga. That's never easy. Was 3rd in the Bluegrass last time. I mean, well handled by further ado. But this is a horse that's worked well since. Irad Ortiz shows up here. And I feel like he's one that could get the right kind of maybe hold up ride, little bit of stalk and pounce action. I think he can overperform at a price. We'll throw in the 5 along with the other runners we talked about in the Preakness Stakes.
47.4 4-furlong work at Keeneland. That's moving. That's cooking with grease. Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned Atfield too, because I believe I might have been on Atfield that day, and I was like, I'm kind of looking, is there an excuse to toss that out? You gave me the excuse I needed.
There you
PTF.
go.
You gave me the excuse I needed.
Let's get it.
I appreciate so much for you coming hanging out with us, talking horses. It's so much fun this time of year. I know some people are bummed that we won't have a Triple Crown runner, but the Triple Crown races are always a great afternoon to kind of open up that First Bet app, watch the races, see the sights, see the sounds. I'm going to be fired up this Saturday.
Here's the thing, from a sporting point of view, of course you want those horses in, and it creates this great national interest that we might not have. But for the real ones, the people watching your stuff, the people watching my stuff, we want great betting races, and we've got a ton of those.
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
pumped for the Preakness, man.
It's going to be a great time. PTF, Pete Thomas Fortertail from In the Money Media, hanging out with us to preview the Preakness. It's always a pleasure, and hopefully we'll be chatting again soon.